All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode. That's right, of the London is Blue podcast. Hopefully your favorite Chelsea podcast out there and a part of the Men in Blazers media network. Dan, one of your hosts here. And look, we did not kickstart these right at the beginning of the season because transfer season was upon us. The content had to come first for that. But now that the transfer window is closed, the first international break is out of the way, we are returning to the wonderful, the often requested, never duplicated, Sam CFC Central match preview on the London is Blue channel. And Sam, welcome back for this. How has it been going switching from player profiling to club profiling as we get ready for this, the West Ham match preview and the return of your match previews for the season?
Always a delight because I love doing these little segments with you. It gives me enough time to catch up, and obviously, we have a lot of fun recording them. Plus, I get to sort of polish up on my opposition scouting analysis, which is also like a big part of, how it all works in the football business. So, I mean, great practice for me. So, yeah, super, super chuffed to be here. And yeah, hoping that we have a lot more high level games to cover, hopefully in the finals of the Conference League or the FA Cup. But fingers crossed that these are humble beginnings and they'll take us there.
And just maybe on the top of it, West Ham, your opinion on just are they a better side now than they were at the end of last season? Yes or no?
That's a tricky question, and I thought we'd probably like discuss it deeper into the preview, but I would actually agree that the squad is much, much better than last season. And there may be like I would say I know it's like super cliched, but they are definitely in a moment of heavy transition of moving away from what was a stale, sort of very defensive, reactive kind of football to, getting somebody like a Julian Lopetegui and moving towards a more possession oriented, proactive kind of football. So the talent is there, but the transition in terms of styles is still taking place. So I think that's the big challenge for them, how well they adapt. But the players that they've signed, I would say, probably had one of the best windows in Europe, in my opinion, just in terms of quality, in terms of bargains, have done very, very well. So, but yeah, it's still too early for them.
Well, that is just again, we're setting the table for what we're going to talk about because we are going to take a look at where West Ham are at currently, any type of injury concerns that they might have, updates on their style of play, things that are working really well for them on the pitch, and then also where their areas of opportunity are. We'll talk about how Maresca or what problems Maresca is going to have to solve for, and then we'll come up with maybe some predictions, don't to be exact scores, but maybe just how we think Chelsea will get on in this match to allow ourselves to look back in the next one of these that we do and either be extremely excited or feel miserable that we got it completely wrong. But before we do that, the quick admin out of the way, thank you to everybody who always supports the podcast. You can always do so with a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It's always appreciated. Or you can jump over to YouTube, subscribe to the channel, like and comment on the videos. For this one, you should just say that you're welcoming Sam back to his previews and you're super excited. You also can sign up for our free weekly newsletter, the London is Blue Dispatch, and you can get involved in our free or paid version of our Discord community. But look, Sam, as we take a look at it, 14th place in the Premier League, a record of 4 total points. It's an average, no surprise there, 4 matches, 1 point per game. This West Ham team has struggled at home, 0-0-2 in terms of their record. Their away record is improved with 1 win and 1 draw. That's where they've gotten their 4 points. They have scored 5 total goals in the campaign so far. They've allowed in 6, so it's a goal difference of -1. And look, the expected goals is 5.1, so the computer and the eye test might match up and say that they're doing exactly what they have willed themselves to do. And the expected goals allowed 7.8. So maybe a little bit better defensively in shot stopping on the day. And, that last match they had was a 1-1 draw at Fulham. Maybe just to kind of set the stage, I know you talked a little bit about some of the incomings, outgoings. Any particular matches that you would point to and say like, hey, if you had time, before Chelsea play West Ham this weekend, this releasing on Friday, would there be one match or a set match highlights, maybe even for someone who wants a micro dose effectively of what West Ham style looks like? Which one would you recommend somebody seek out if they can go back and watch one of the matches?
Yeah, Dan, I mean, I did watch two games, and at this point of the season, I can proudly say that I've seen 50% of their games. But I did watch the performance against Manchester City, which I thought would be maybe like a similar stylistic fit in terms of how they'd react to maybe a slightly more possession-oriented squad. And I watched the game against Fulham to prepare for this um, preview that we're doing. But just to give you again a little bit of context, last season they finished ninth, and there was a lot of pressure on Moyes, and I think it wore him down as well because he delivered a European title to them, and felt like the fans were being very ungrateful in terms of saying, we demand more and we want a more proactive kind of style of play if you want to push for Europe. So there was a lot of friction, and the bubble sort of burst, pun intended. And maybe like the hierarchy said, we need to move on to a more progressive coach in that sense. And Julian Lopetegui came in. Again, like I mentioned, the summer window is very good. If you look at some of the players that they've gotten, Crescencio Somerville, we will link to him in the summer window, Championship Player of the Season. Nicholas Füllkrug, who played very well at the Euros, also helped Dortmund to the Champions League final. Carlos Soler, they've got from PSG, who wasn't used as such, but is also a pretty good player, who's I think 27 years old, so in his prime. Guido Rodriguez was somebody I was watching at the World Cup. Um, when we were doing player pods and the guys to watch before Enzo Caicedo, and he almost joined Barcelona, but they couldn't register him, so he came to West Ham. And Jean-Claude Todibo, who's also one of the best centre backs in League 1, who's joined this season. So Man United almost got him, couldn't get him because there was a clash of ownership between like Mr. Jim and the board on Nice, so they basically couldn't agree on um getting him to Manchester United. But that's the profile that they've signed. They've signed players who've perhaps been playing at a higher level, who've been experienced at that high level, and basically have come to a club that's pushing to get to the next level. So in essence, should be a recipe for success. But then again, it's also about trying to change the culture, the style, and trying to move away from the mentality that you're the underdog to, yes, we're here to control games and we're here to exert influence, which I think is going to be super tough for the manager and the players to do. And they've got the right guy. I actually saw so much of him at Sevilla because I was watching Jules Koundé for um, a year before we actually were very close to signing him. And he's a very possession oriented, very vertical, very forward thinking manager who, again, is highly underrated, and got Sevilla to some really, really good honors. So, yeah, I think it's definitely like a side waiting to pop in terms of potential, in terms of delivering really good performances. But again, it's just 4 games into the season, and maybe like parallels to us too in terms of unlearning certain things and embracing certain other traits in terms of moving towards different style of play, and that's where they are right now in a good and a bad way.
Trying to determine if we can emerge from the cocoon as a butterfly or potentially as a moth. It sounds like we're these both clubs, Chelsea and West Ham, are trying to figure out how they are going to display themselves once they are seen by the world. But we're going to get into the full list of strengths and weaknesses after this very quick first ad break. So stay tuned. We are back. All right, Sam. So if we take a look at the style of play and maybe defining some of that style of play, going a little bit deeper in there, and then also some of the strengths that you've identified. Where do you want to take us from the start to set, a little bit around and just give people more understanding about what we should expect over these 90 minutes of football that Chelsea are going to be playing this weekend?
Yeah, absolutely. So without a doubt, I think because it's so early on in the season, their strength right now is just individual quality. The amount of really good, high value players that they have who can provide something on an individual standpoint is immense. And you only have to look at, certain guys like Jared Bowen or Mohammad Kudus, both powerful two-way runners, very direct attackers who offer high shot quality and quantity both, which is again a great thing to have in your side. Up front, you've got, a veteran in Antonio who's kind of aging, but still able to demand the attention of both the centre backs and the back line. So he's able to create, a lot of space for those two guys to function, and it tends to work well. He's not a prolific scorer anymore. Obviously, he has spells, but he creates a lot of important space for the three guys behind him, which is quite beneficial to them. This season, when I've seen them, they're playing a 4-2-3-1, which sort of goes into a 4-5-1 or a 4-1-4-1, or even a 5-2-3, which I saw against Manchester City out of possession. And in a low block, Edson Alvarez, who's one of the central midfielders, tends to slot into centre back to become the third centre back, and that makes a back line of five. So they go 5-4-1 in a low block. And if you look at the makeup of the side, Dan, from a physical standpoint, they're actually pretty tall and strong guys. You don't want them to be in that sort of like you mentioned, a cocoon or a shell where you're trying to aerially exploit them with crosses and long balls, because it generally doesn't work. They've got strong aerial players there, and they're able to sort of resist that kind of point of entry. So that's where they are strong. I think that's also what Moyes made them very good at, just sitting back, absorbing pressure like a sponge, like a coiled spring, and then exploding into transition with those very quick ball carriers. And if you look at the midfield core, if you see Lucas Paqueta, if you see Guido Rodriguez, if you see Alvarez, they're all very solid in small, tight spaces, and they're pretty good at the defensive stuff like breaking play and making like small recovery runs and winning second balls. So that's what they're very good at. So you don't want to play through the center too much. They won't allow you to do that. Also, Dan, just to give you a slight maybe um, statistical sort of context as to how their style of play is changing. So we've got a metric which is PPDA, which we use often in these preview pods, which tends to give you a measure of how proactive a side is in terms of pressing. So the higher the number, um, if for example the number is 20, that means a side waits 20 passes before committing a defensive action. So last season they were at 15.95, which was one of the highest in the league. So one of the most non-proactive and the most passive pressing sides in the league. This season, in two games, they've gone from 15.95, nearly 16, to 9.33 versus Villa, and they were at 6.87 versus Fulham. So they're already showing you a change in terms of, pressing in those forward areas and trying to win the ball back there, and trying to hit you from those attacking zones rather than waiting to win the ball back deeper and then exploding over long sprints. So that's, I think, trying to inculcate a different culture of being aggressive, of being comfortable on the ball. And again, it's just been maybe the basics, the groundwork is being laid down, and it will take maybe another month, 2 months, maybe longer to sort of like reap dividends. And the last point I'd like to say is, like, in terms of attacking metrics, I think they profile pretty similarly to us. They've encountered the same problems. They've sort of had a similar number of shots. They've had a similar number of touches in the penalty box, which again, compared to the talent that they have, isn't adequate. Like, you need to be providing more from just the supply standpoint. Like, give them more touches, give them more shots, and if you can scale up that supply line, then obviously the output also goes up. So that's where they are at. And I mean, they're already waiting on certain players to come. So Todibo hasn't played a lot, I think, at all. Somerville has had like maybe 20 minutes or so. So those two star guys that they've signed will obviously get, a little bit of a run in, and will become important players for the course of the season. So it's just the start for them. And I would also like to say that this is probably the perfect time to play West Ham, because you don't want to play them when they've had time to settle and figure out what they want to do with this new style. So you're catching them in the middle of two worlds. and hopefully you can exploit that little bit of chaos there.
So speaking of exploiting chaos, I know that there are plenty of weaknesses, particularly earlier in the season when there's a new manager, when there's a team in transition, as you referenced earlier, and thinking about where they are likely to be exposed. So in this match, taking a look at areas where Chelsea will be able to get at him based upon what hasn't worked out for this West Ham side over their first couple matches. What are a couple that you want to highlight as red flags or concerns that you would have from a West Ham perspective, which should also make Chelsea supporters giddy because we know that there's an opportunity to get at them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the last line that I mentioned was key because when I do watch them play, I think there are maybe like two West Ham sides sort of like struggling to win a battle of identity. And it's just to give you an example, I was watching the Fulham game, and in the 24th, 23rd minute, they tried going long from the back like they would under David Moyes. And as soon as the ball was won by Fulham, just before that, 2 seconds before that, they pushed their defensive line up almost to like the middle third, like the halfway line. And this is something that Lopetegui would want his side to do. So again, when Moyes was sort of there, his line would remain deep. His defensive midfielders would be trying to marshal that space. Instead, the entire like back six sort of pushed up, and all Pereira had to do when he won the ball was just clip a through ball in behind. And Emil Smith Rowe ran to the byline and basically found a cutback to Raul Jimenez. And it was just an easy, easy goal to score. So it did look like a clash of identities, two different things sort of like trying to come together and sort of fighting against each other. So that happens a lot. They're also trying consciously to play out from the back. They're trying to sort of you know, have that build-up sequences inculcated that Lopetegui has tried in the past. Again, quite quick sequences, not very heavy possession oriented, but just like clear sequences in terms of how to move the ball. And a lot of that stuff that they're trying at the back is new. So Alvarez, Guido, Rodriguez is a new pivot. They haven't played together before the season. Max Kilman and Mavropanos haven't played together, so that's a new pivot as well. So it's still formative. It's not established relationships, and there have been a couple of times that they've tried to play out in tight spaces and they've given the ball away. If you see the Haaland goal, the second Haaland goal, I think Paqueta basically just dallies and loses the ball in that zone, and they're all over the place. And Haaland just has, a quick stride into the box and boom, like he explodes and gets a goal. So quite, I would say again, a difficult place to be in. I empathize a little bit because it's a huge jump to make in terms of playing style. So that is something that you can capitalize on. Something else that I noticed was that the defensive pivot is quite slow and quite vulnerable in defensive transition. So Alvarez, for example, was actually a centre back before he was made into a defensive midfielder, and his recovery pace is okay. Like his top speed is good, but his initial explosive acceleration isn't ideal. And the same thing I can say for Guido Rodriguez as well. So they're quite slow to start in terms of defensive transition. So if you're able to find the space behind them, or at least like find them on the blind side, then you can 100% hit them very, very hard. You can directly run at the back line. And Fulham were very good at this. They basically positioned Emil Smith Rowe, Iwobi, all these strong ball carriers in these little pockets. And um, yeah, both of them struggled in central midfield. So that's something that you can do. Obviously, you don't want to be too reliant on attacking transitions because that's what we did last season. And you're using chaos also in a way, but it's something that works. It's something that Fulham worked very, very well. And the third thing, again, from an individual standpoint, I noticed was City and Fulham were both using switches to the flanks and the left flank in particular. Like I mentioned, West Ham this season are trying to be very compact, even with a back five. So it's extremely narrow. So if you look at their fullbacks, they're almost playing like five centre backs. They're that narrow, like in the width of the box. And Man City and Fulham both tried isolating the winger or the number eight versus Wan Bissaka. And from that position, instead of taking him on 1v1 because Wan Bissaka is so good, They tried using crosses to the far post against Emerson, who isn't that great in the air, for Haaland and Jimenez. So that's something that they did quite often. And the switches were, there were about like four switches in each game to that particular section. So maybe that's something that if you want to isolate your winger against Van Bissaka and try to cross to the far post, um, that's something that maybe worked for both of them, not necessarily for us because Jackson is not great in the air, Noni isn't that great in the air, so remains to be seen. But that sort of like worked for them. So yeah, these 3 points for beginners, and obviously like we've got a few others that we can definitely highlight.
Yeah, it feels like when you talk about a team that in 4 games has only been able to end up with 5 total goals, and that might be something as the attack, particularly, that might be an area of kind of a weakness or a question mark. And then, is there any issues in terms of like defensive pairings that are or are not working for this side with some of the changes of players or the changes of profile of individuals they have on the pitch?
Yeah, so the one thing I noticed in both the games was that Emerson struggled. And midway through the half, he was clutching his hip, and yeah, he basically had to be subbed off. And they tried to get Van Bissaka on the left-hand side, and they got Vladimir Sufal on the right. And the left side in general seems a little bit of an iffy thing because Kudus is playing on the left-hand side, and he's trying to dribble 1v1 because that's his strength. He's not a very ball uh, heavy kind of in terms of trying to cross or cut back or use his passes. He's very good at just taking on people. And the space that opens up between him and the left back is something that can be exploited. Again, Emerson is an injured out in this game, so he might not play. So Van Bissaka might be there. And it'll be interesting to see like what the matchup will be between Donny and Van Bissaka, and how proactive Van Bissaka is on his weaker flank in terms of how high he pushes up. Because so far he is pushing up very high. Like he's almost trying to overlap and underlap for his winger, which is quite interesting. So if you can exploit that, then I think Noni can do a little bit of things. Again, um Wan-Bissaka is really good in terms of recovery pace, in terms of being an athlete. He can catch up to you. So it will be, again, an interesting thing. But if Sufa starts on the right hand side, then that's a 1v1 matchup that 100% should be exploited. But again, like we have a huge question mark in terms of who plays on that left wing, which we'll obviously discuss later on in the section. But that's something that pairing on the left hand side, Kudus and his fullback, is the relationship there is quite raw and quite prone to being exploited. The second thing I'd like to highlight is that they've struggled to shoot, quality and quantity wise. So 10 shots on target that they've managed is the second lowest in the league. And four of their top six shooters in this season, including Antonio and Kudus, haven't managed a single shot on target in 4 games, which means they're going to score next. So, this is how we do it then. Like we always jinx it. But just to give you again, top shooter is Thomas Suchek with 11, and the highest on shots shots on target is obviously Jared Bowen with 3. But Ings has 2, and everybody else, the other 5 shots allowed 1-1-1 with like 2 of them being centre back. So they've not been shooting. They've not got their boots on. So that's again quite a concern. And the last one I'd probably say like is something that's also happened last season that 2 of their best players are strongest in the same position. And Mohamed Kudus is again a nuisance on the left, but he's just truly lethal on the right. You allow him to come inside and unleash shots with that incredible left foot, and he offers you all kinds of problems. But that's where Jared Bowen starts. So I think Kudus is sort of like diluted on the left hand side in terms of its effectiveness. But again, we should be wary because right back is our weak spot. That's where, again, I don't know if Disasi plays there. I don't know if there's another curveball coming, but Kudus versus whoever is on that right back slot could be a big matchup. But yeah, it's not his strongest side. So hopefully we'll be able to keep him quiet.
Well, yeah, it definitely it's not us jinxing it necessarily, but it is just a standard type of Chelsea thing to have happen. But look, those are some weaknesses that we've identified. There's also some strengths that we run through about this West Ham side, but we're going to get into what that means for Enzo Maresca and this Chelsea team in just a moment, right after this ad break. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Okay, so problems to solve for Enzo Maresca as it relates to this matchup. I think in general, we have been leaking a fair number of goals. It was nice to have an away clean sheet in the Premier League for the first time in almost a year in our most recent match, Sam, but feels like that's probably a element of concern. Can keep up some defensive effort and make life difficult for West Ham team that is struggling to shoot? I think there's the question around who or whom are going to be the attackers that are going to get involved in this, particularly as we've seen a few bright cameo performances over the last 1 to 2 matches. Where are you thinking? What is the biggest headache Enzo Maresca has? And then maybe what are some of the other kind of areas you want to dive into?
Yeah, I think the biggest headache is definitely goals. We've scored six in one game, but we've got two in the other three, which I think is a problem. And I wouldn't be too worried if the underlying numbers were good. And the issue is that the underlying numbers aren't good, even in terms of just getting shots away. Last season also we struggled. I would say that we scored 76, but we were a good 200 shots away from the top guys. So it's a massive, massive gulf, and we're still languishing in the same position, somewhere in ninth, 10th, in the shot metrics. Even touches in the penalty area, we're not doing enough penetration. We're not getting our attackers in the right space. So I think trying to boost our goal tally while also being resolute at the back will be a big, big challenge. Obviously, great to have our first away clean sheet in the Premier League in 349 days, I think. But yeah, goals are. I mean, you've basically been proven that the entire front line you've had is explosive, and they can offer you an incredible amount of goals in the league. So why would you want to lose that? You have to preserve it while getting better defensively. So that's Maresca's biggest headache, without a doubt. And again, what combination of your eight attackers, like a Rubik's Cube, are you going to spin around until you get right? I think that's the big question that he has to answer.
And then just in terms of lineup, I know we've seen a couple of different rollouts from Enzo Maresca around what may or may not work in terms of a defensive grouping and then who's tucking in from like the inverted fullbacks. Any thoughts about that being a issue in terms of how we set up the defense in this match, even though we know that West Ham have struggled to score?
Yeah, this one's an interesting sort of debate because I saw the City game and they were inverting Rico Lewis from right back, and that sort of caused a lot of problems to West Ham because, again, like I mentioned, Kudus is somebody who likes being in advanced positions, and when Lewis was, moving into central midfield positions, then there was this kind of question mark between who's going to take him. Is Kudus going to track him, or is Emerson going to sort of step up and try to push on him? And both of them tried doing it at the same time, and that left Jeremy Doku on the right hand side versus their left centre back Gilman. And that's maybe something that your inverted fullback can cause on either side if you're able to drag that fullback or that winger narrow and open up like 1v1 avenues for your winger. So I don't know if we follow through with what Kukurea did against Antoine Semenyo, trying to sort of push the winger back. But if that happens on the left hand side, then you're actively asking the right winger to track. So Bowen, for example, if he's playing on the right hand side, will have to sort of keep one eye on Kukurea when they don't have the ball. And the hope is that if we keep 65, 67% of the ball, then Bowen will have to do a lot of tracking back and starting from a deeper defensive position. So is this maybe something that you're going to see again, like Kukurea playing as a 10 to pin, the opposition winger, who is probably their most dangerous player? That one will be an interesting thing to see. I don't necessarily agree with it from a tactical standpoint, but I can see what he's trying to do, like in terms of blunting the opposition's strongest attacker. But that's the question mark for me. Like I didn't like Disasi at right back at all. I didn't quite enjoy Vega in defensive midfield, but again, I'll give him the credit because it's his first, proper game. And second half, he improved quite well. So maybe that's an experiment that you might have to sort of follow through with, considering Enzo, Lavia, and Dewsbury Hall might not be, ideal there. So Fingers crossed.
So then, with some of those elements that you mentioned, do you have a preferred defensive lineup for this match? I mean, we saw the heroic Bob Sanchez between the sticks, so I don't think there's a change in the keeper position. But you mentioned this question mark around D Saucy at right back. We know we saw Wes Fofana have an opportunity to switch over to that position. Malagusto looks to be back in training, but do Chelsea risk or rush him back in the lineup? That would be a question mark, and we don't have the benefit of Enzo Maresca's press conference. And then you have Cucurella most likely on the left, and then Levi Colwell. Like, do you make any changes there? Are you looking to potentially bring someone in and sub out for this match?
Yeah, that's a tough one because you're up against two very very good wide attackers in Kudus and Bowen, and I really don't want Disasi doing that job. Obviously, I would have been much more comfortable with Trev Chalobah doing it. I also don't trust like West Fofana to do it. He didn't have a very good game. The last one, gave away the ball very very clumsily at least like three times, and again he's finding form. He's been out for a long time, so I can give him the benefit of the doubt there, but you ideally don't want a center back in that position. In my head, maybe it would make sense to again. I can't even say play Kukurea at right back because we don't have a left back either. So I'm a bit lost, Dan. I generally don't know. Maybe the easiest thing to do is like continue with Disasi at right back and try to help him build his confidence there. But I also like Tosin when he came on. I'm just a little hesitant to you know go off substitute appearances and maybe like move West to the right side and maybe damage his confidence against Kudus. So yeah, it'll be the biggest like one of the biggest headaches for Maresca as well, like how the back four looks, especially
Yeah.
that right back slot. I think if he figures that out, then we'll probably be able to blunt their two biggest weapons. But that's what I'm concerned about. Kudus having a very good game.
And then I think the other big question, particularly after his cameo appearance and bright start to a Chelsea career that is hopefully filled with accolades, Jadon Sancho had that 45-minute appearance. Is he likely, in your mind, a starter in this scenario, in this match? We have seen that there's maybe not a full trust in Pedro Neto just yet. And we know that Mikhailo Mudryk, even now, getting rumored with January links. We only just ended a transfer window, and there's already discussion about what happens for Mikhailo Mudryk in January. Thoughts on Sancho must start? Sancho likely gets another 45 or maybe 60, and then Neto comes in for the back half. What is your thought on what the decision would be with Sancho?
As far as I know, he was doing individual work after the game. So I'm not certain he's fit to play, a full 90 or even like I would say 60. So I would think maybe he'll again come on for maybe like 45. But again, it's like you mentioned, another big point to make because Neto has been hooked three times in a row for club and country at 45 minutes. So his confidence isn't, at its absolute peak. He also looks, much less fit and sharp than he does at his best. And he's had an injury ravaged last season. So I can understand that he needs time to get to full fitness. Mudryk, like you said, is out in the cold. So again, like, what do you want to do there, and how do you also sort of bench a player that won you the game last season? Sorry, last game, and then where do you play him? I think is the big question. So again, he's got a big headache at right back and at left wing. Whether he tries to play Nkunku there and figure out something, I genuinely don't know. He's not used him a lot, surprisingly, in the Premier League, but again, like I think Sancho makes sense, but I just don't think he's maybe perhaps physically ready to start from, the first 45 and complete. So maybe Neto again starts and Sancho makes, second half entry. But again, I really like what Grealish did against Van Bissaka on the right hand side. And I think if you have somebody like a Sancho who's again creating shots just by pushing the opposition fullback deep into their box and finding the gaps inside the box at the edge of the box, he just makes everybody else better. So It'll be interesting to see who starts at left wing. I would love to see Sancho continue on his great stellar debut, but I think it might be Neto instead. What about you? Do you have sort of like a preference versus a premonition in terms of who starts?
Ooh, preference over premonition. I do feel like if there's a putting him in on the back half of the match, doing individual training with the away from the full group, it feels like it's shading towards a Neto start if we're going with the premonition rather of the prognostication. I think a preference based upon just what we saw and wanting to see more of it, seeing Jaden Sancho get an opportunity is very, very interesting. I think also maybe the other question is after a 11-minute cameo with Christopher Nkunku, like, is he someone who deserves to start a match at this point versus being a sub over someone like Nico Jackson or getting into the lineup over another attacker in our 3 to 4 spots that we have every match? Is that something you're considering in this match, or do you feel like it's not necessarily the opportunity for him to start based upon the opposition matchup?
I was listening to you and Nick on the midweek pod, and I think you guys made like a very salient point in terms of why Keenan Dewsbury Hall, because he was brought in to be, that elusive left eight who was able to underlap, give you a lot of shunting, box to box runs, also sort of like replace Gallagher in terms of giving you, something that connects the two boxes. And now suddenly you've gone from the 4-3-3 at Leicester to a 4-2-3-1 where his role does not exist. He does not play as defensive pivot. At least like he's played a couple of times under Maresca there, but his strongest point is either as a number 10 or you give him like that 8 sort of role where he can shunt back and forth. The same dilemma is, I think, for Nkunku, like he's not a left winger, he's not an 8, he's arguably not a centre forward either, even though he came for Jackson and he scored. So where is that fit for him? And do you also have to adapt now to sort of figure out a way to play him now that you feel like he can offer something that nobody else can? That's going to be the big dilemma. And I think eventually we might see another sort of shift somewhere to a different kind of system. Again, he's tried a lot of moving parts and figuring out permutations and combinations. So I don't think he's settled on his favored 11 or even his favorite system as of now. I think he's just trying to figure out if he's got a grip on every single weapon in his armory before he constructs whatever he wants to construct. So yeah, I think we still have to see an ideal fit for him as well as an ideal fit for a couple of other players like Dewsbury Hall. But the sooner you're able to get the best out of them, the better for the side. So hopefully we'll see it. But I do think Nkunku would be a very, very good player. It's just he's again not a left winger, and center forward is sort of like a position where he has to do things he doesn't like, and that can be an issue. So
Yeah.
I'm actually intrigued to see how he solves those issues for me. But we saw what he can do last game. Like he pulls out, a giraffe out of a hat. So we need that at this point in time.
Well, those are all going to be things to keep in consideration for Enzo Maresca as he gets ready to set a starting 11 for this match and think about who the subs off the bench are going to be based upon the game state. But if you think about what the end result of this match is going to be, Sam, it's got to be a win, right? It's got to be a win for Chelsea. Come on.
Well, I actually feel slightly optimistic here. Again, like I have full respect
Famous last words from
for
a
what.
lot of our podcasts last season.
Yeah, I mean, true, true. But hey, I mean, at the end of it, I really thought that we ended the season in great spirits, and I do think that we have to hit our stride sooner rather than later. So this is, like I mentioned, the ideal time to face West Ham just before they click into gear. I'm just praying to the footballing gods that it's not this game where they miraculously figure how every single thing in their side is supposed to work. So I do think that they're struggling. They're sort of like stylistically conflicted. So it's time to exploit it. And we've got the better, more technical side. We've got the right players to absolutely make them pay for this. So I'd probably go for like maybe a 2-0 win. So fingers crossed. Again, I'm going for a clean sheet, which is way optimistic of me, but their home record is also like utter garbage this season. So hopefully we can put another clean sheet on the road and yeah, build a really good momentum before we go to battle.
Well, I am right there with you. I hope it is a clean sheet. I hope it's a win, and I hope we are getting a chance in the post-match live stream that we do on YouTube to get an opportunity to celebrate 3 points in Chelsea doing the business this weekend. But let us know your thoughts in the comments on YouTube if you're there, or in the Discord community. What do you think is going to happen in this match? Is it a Chelsea win? Is it a Chelsea draw? Is it a Chelsea loss? Please no. Let it be anything other than the last one. But that's going to do it for this episode. So thank you so much to Sam for getting us prepped and ready for this match against West Ham. Thank you so much to you, the listener or viewer who's enjoying the podcast. Don't forget to leave 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts or Spotify if you can. We always appreciate that. And until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.